When I was still in middle school, my math teacher once told me that I'd end up in the sewers if I kept phoning it in during class. I mean, I guess he was right. It was around 5 a.m. when we landed in Staten Island. The flight over was pretty quiet, with both Luke and Armin holding expressions that I knew all too well. It was the expression that one might make when they weren't quite sure what was going to happen next. "This is as much as I can help you," the pilot said, as he tried to hide the weary expression on his face. We nodded at him as he prepared to take off. He didn't seem enthusiastic about sticking around to see what would happen next, and I couldn't blame him for that. Losing a friend in Colt couldn't have felt too good either. We only had to wait for about 10 minutes to be picked up. 4 vehicles, all different makes and models, pulled up, with a taller blonde woman coming out of the lead car. Her face seemed to be frozen in a perpetual grimace as she walked up to Luke. "What the hell have you done?" she said through gritted teeth, looking just about ready to break Luke's other arm on the spot. "I thought you knew how to follow simple instructions." "Yeah?" Luke responded, holding a similar expression to hers. "And I thought you knew how to recruit people. Your guy Visser was a fucking mole, Valerie." "What the hell are you talking about?" she said. "Are you sure?" "The motherfucker turned on us and then started filming the attack," Luke continued. "He also killed Colt, so yeah, I'm pretty fucking sure." Valerie's expression suddenly changed as she muttered something under her breath. And then she looked over at me. "He's the new guy, right?" I nodded in response. "And Colt's the only one dead on our side?" she asked. "Yeah," Luke responded. "Good," she said. "I guess we broke even. Time to go to Manhattan." She turned, heading back towards the vehicle. I looked over at Luke, who just smirked. Wouldn't get on her bad side. We drove from Staten Island deep into Manhattan, before finally arriving at an unassuming-looking Chinese restaurant. "Let me guess," I said as we pulled up. "Another secret CIA base?" "Don't sound so surprised," Luke said as he hopped out. At that point, I suppose nothing should have surprised me at all. We passed through the main dining area, before descending into the basement to find about 30 armed soldiers/agents getting geared up. "Is this everybody?" Luke asked. "Just about," Valerie responded. "Except for Gustafsson. He's in the freezer. Had a hell of a time getting him over here." "Gustafsson? Is that the secret weapon you guys were talking about?" I asked. "Last resort," Armin clarified. "And yes, Marcus Gustafsson. He was a 6'7" Swedish-American SOG agent who opted to join the fight against Kane. As with everybody else, he was given a dose of the serum. However, his body's response to it was a bit different from everybody else's. His strength and speed were elevated to ludicrous levels, far surpassing even Colt's. Couple that with his massive frame, and he was essentially a human wrecking ball. Those boosts came with a drawback though. In exchange for his physical prowess, his mind degenerated into something comparable to a primal beast. If anybody were to stand in front of him, they were getting bulldozed, regardless of who they were. There was only one feasible way to control him, and that was by putting him into freezing temperatures. When that happened, he was capable of retaining some degree of his old self. Some degree of sanity. "If we take him out, we'll only have about 30 minutes until he loses control again," Valerie continued to explain. "That means we'll have to work quick." "Shouldn't be a problem," Luke responded. "We only have to cover the entirety of Lower Manhattan's sewer system." "Just get it done," she said. "You know how important this is. Don't fuck it up." Luke rolled his eyes. "You don't need to tell me that, all right? Focus on yourself." She shot him a glare before walking away. "Jesus," Luke muttered, shaking his head, before turning to me. "But she's right. This is important," he said. "It's also very dangerous. You've survived so far, but I really couldn't tell you what's about to happen next. If you want to back out right now, then that's fine. Your choice. With all that said, are you still coming with us?" I already knew that the question was nothing more than a polite gesture. I could tell that I really didn't have an option at all. I was already in pretty deep, after all. And if the world really was at stake here, then they needed all the help they could get. I nodded and shook his hand. In some strange way, it felt like my fate had been sealed from the very start regardless. We were headed into the sewers. We split up into 10 groups in order to cover more ground. I was with Luke and Armin, of course. The plan was simple in theory. We just had to locate where the robot aliens were being kept and eliminate them all. If we ran into Kane himself, then we needed to radio Valerie, lure him towards a rendezvous point and shoot him with our last bullet. From there, we'd have to neutralize the remaining bots and organize a scrub of any trace of their existence. And things became a little too overwhelming. We'd have to resort to unleashing Marcus. I didn't say it'd be easy. Just straightforward. I could think of about 100 different ways this could go south quick. Nevertheless, this really was our only shot. As hard as I tried to mentally prepare myself for our descent into the murky tunnels, I still couldn't stop myself from gagging as we waded through the calf-deep river of who knows what. Luke and Armin weren't even trying to suppress their amusement at my discomfort. "Is this funny?" I asked. "Does it smell good to you guys or something?" "We've been through a lot worse," Armin responded. "This really ain't much in comparison." "You want to hear some stories to pass the time while we search?" Luke asked. I didn't take him up on the offer. I had to focus on not throwing up instead. After about 15 minutes of walking, we came across one of the creatures, which caused me to flinch as the light attached to my rifle illuminated it. Thankfully, it was dead. It also seemed to be different from the ones we'd encountered in Russia. More gruesome in appearance. It was about twice the size, so big that it nearly blocked the entire tunnel. It was also covered in what appeared to be boils. Large, pulsing spheres that were fighting for space across its torso. Luke walked forward cautiously before quickly turning away, his hand clamped over his nose. "Jesus!" he muttered. "It smells like death." Armin grabbed a knife off of his belt and stepped forward. "What are you doing?" I asked him. "I just want to know what we're dealing with here," he responded. He chucked the blade at one of the boils, causing it to burst open. I couldn't stop myself from puking a little bit in my mouth after seeing what came out of it. These things began crawling out. There had to be dozens of them, all about the size of a large rat. They looked like spiders at first, but as they crawled closer to me, it became evident that they were just smaller versions of the creature. It looked like something straight out of hell itself. "Fuck me," Luke said. "Weren't these things supposed to be robots?" He looked around, before stomping on one of the creatures and completely pulverizing it. "I don't see any wires here," he continued. I looked back at the creature, watching as the boils started to bulge and thrash, as if the monstrosities within were getting ready to hatch at any moment. "Biotechnology," Armin said. "Real taboo subject. It makes sense, though. Why build robots from scratch when you can just breed the organic matter and modify them at maturation?" He seemed to know quite a bit about the topic. "But still," he continued, "I suppose this complicates things. Since the creature was blocking most of the tunnel and we didn't want to risk accidentally popping another one out, we took a different route in order searching. As noon began closing in, we still hadn't managed to find anything else of note. I could tell that Luke and Armin were getting worried, although they were doing a good job of hiding it. My mind began drifting, conjuring up images of these creatures running amok in Manhattan. How would people react? How the hell would the world respond? My thoughts suddenly halted when I started feeling something below me. It was rumbling, coming from beneath our feet. It didn't take a genius to realize what this meant. The creatures weren't being held in the sewer tunnels, they were being held underneath them. And it seemed as if they were already on the move. We were 10 minutes away from noon, so we didn't exactly have the time to propose an extensive plan. We simply had to act. Armin pulled out something that looked like a large block of C4, before planting it in the water. He detonated it, causing the water to flow into the hole that had been created. I could see another tunnel beneath, as the rumbling continued to increase in intensity. Armin tossed a flashbang and we hopped down. There were no soldiers waiting for us, but what we found there was startling regardless. It wasn't just another sewer tunnel. It was a hallway. One that looked like it could have been plucked out of any office building. We were all in disbelief as we walked forward, staring at the inexplicable sight around us. We began hearing footsteps coming from the corridor behind us only moments later. It was no mystery what the source was. We'd made a hell of a lot of noise coming down. I raised my rifle just as a group of soldiers turned the corner. I opened fire, but none of them even flinched in response. Of course. They were all on the serum. I glanced down at my watch. 5 minutes before noon, and from the sound of it, an entire army of robots were marching beneath us. "Let's go!" Armin yelled. I turned around, watching as him and Luke began running. We scrambled through corridor after corridor, trying feverishly to find another way down while evading the soldiers simultaneously. The pressure starting mounting as they began converging on us at seemingly every corner. As hard as we looked, there didn't seem to be anywhere for us to go. Not that we had much time to begin with. We soon found ourselves in the middle of an intersecting corridor, being boxed in by soldiers in every direction. They weren't shooting at us, or even running. Instead, they approached us calmly, almost as if they were robots themselves. I suppose they didn't need to rush. We were completely trapped. "Fuck it," I heard Armin say. I looked over at him, watching as he pulled out another block of C4. "What the hell are you doing?" Luke asked. "If it worked once, it'll work again," Armin continued. "Brace yourselves." He planted the explosive right beneath our feet and detonated it. I could feel a surging pain overwhelming my entire lower body as the floor broke beneath us, causing us to fall deeper into the strange underground complex. I'm not sure how far we fell. It had to be at least a few dozen feet. Possibly a lot more. My head continued to ring as I tried to regain my bearings, looking around to see that we'd fallen into some sort of lab. And the more I looked, the more bizarre things became. The place was massive. Almost too big for me to comprehend how it could have been built. There were rows upon rows of glass chambers, filled with all matters of grotesque creatures. I looked over at Luke, who also seemed completely dumbstruck by the sight. Armin was fidgeting with the radio, likely trying to call Valerie. "I can't reach her," he said. "I guess these don't work this far below ground." "Of course they don't," Luke grumbled. "We have to find a way out of here." Armin shook his head. "No. We have to finish the mission. We need to find and kill Kane." "What are you talking about?" Luke responded, clearly floored at the thought of it. "The invasion's already started." "Does that change anything?" Armin responded. "We still have a job to do." "Come on, man," Luke said. "Let's find a way out of here. Then we can regroup with the rest and come up with a better plan. There's nothing we can do here." Armin seemed to hesitate for a moment, his expression showing signs of apprehension. But in the end, Luke's words didn't deter him. He ran off by himself before either of us could say anything else. "Fucking hell," Luke muttered as he grabbed my arm. "Let's go." "Aren't we gonna go after him?" I asked. "Do we have the time?" He responded. "The guy's made up his mind and we have our own asses to save." As wrong as it felt leaving him behind like that, I decided to follow Luke. I suppose he was right. This mission was over. Still, the chances of us making it back to the surface didn't seem so high. Also, what would be waiting for us once we got up there? Noon had already come and passed. I could only imagine the chaos that was already transpiring. As we ran through the seemingly endless lab, I could hear footsteps chasing us once again. We finally reached what seemed to be the end, only to be met with another adjacent corridor, this one lined with rows of metal doors and panels of glass in between. I glanced into a few of them as we ran, seeing people in heavy medical gear wielding massive tools, staining the walls with the blood of unknown specimens. This whole operation clearly went deeper than Luke or anybody on the outside could have imagined. We ended up running into another group of soldiers, who were storming right towards us from the other end. This time, there was no way of evading them. We were stuck in the middle of the corridor with nowhere else to run and no more C4 left to detonate. Even if there was another level below us, I doubted that I wanted to see what was there. We just had to face them head on. I ran forward in an attempt to force myself through but was immediately pushed back, the impact leaving me gasping for air. As I scrambled on the ground, I could feel an immense pressure wrapping around my neck, almost as if I were being strangled by a python. I didn't stay conscious for much longer after that. When I finally came to, I found myself sitting on the floor, my arms and legs bound by some kind of metal restraint. I tried struggling, but they wouldn't budge. I looked around, seeing just about everybody else in there with me. Luke, Armin, Valerie, and a larger, extremely beat-up man who I could only assume was Marcus. Even our last resort had been captured. We really never stood a chance, did we? I made eye contact with Luke. And then Armin. I knew that we were all thinking the same thing. This was nothing short of a complete and utter disaster. The rest of the room was pretty much empty, which was strange, since it was apparently large enough to hold upwards of 50 people. I had to wonder how much time and effort went into building a place like this. I could see a few soldiers guarding the exits, but no security beyond that. I couldn't understand why they hadn't just killed us. We must have just sat there in silence for about 15 minutes before somebody else finally walked in. It was a man of average height and extremely muscular build. Everybody else seemed to recognize him, as they stared with wide eyes and flared nostrils. As I would soon come to find out, this was Kane. The man behind all of the madness. He gave off a bizarre energy as he walked towards us, with his carefree movements and impossible to read expression. I wasn't sure if I was just going crazy, but I knew that I recognized him somehow. But I couldn't quite place where those memories may have stemmed from. "Why don't you just kill us, Kane?" Valerie said. "There's no chance in hell we're joining you. Because that wouldn't help anybody," he said, stopping a few feet away from us. "You never gave me a chance to explain my intentions." "That's something you have to earn," Armin spoke up, his voice saturated with rage. "And you lost that when you started murdering people." Kane glanced over at him, before shaking his head. "They wouldn't listen. I tried reaching out to them and they refused to hear me out. But I'm a patient man. I'm willing to give everybody here another chance. I'll explain why all of this is necessary.